Chair recognizes Professor Blakey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next witness to be called this afternoon is J. Lee Rankin. Mr. Rankin served as General Counsel to the Warren Commission. He received an A.B. degree in 1928 and an LL.B. degree in 1930 from the University of Nebraska. He is admitted to practice in New York, Nebraska, and the District of Columbia. Mr. Rankin served from 1953 to 1956 as Assistant Attorney General of the United States Department of Justice in charge of the Office of Legal Counsel, and from 1956 to 1961 as the Solicitor General of the United States. After serving as General Counsel of the Warren Commission, he became the Corporation Counsel for the City of New York from 1966 to 1972. Currently, he is in private practice in New York with the firm of Rankin and Rankin. It would be appropriate at this time, Mr. Chairman, to call Mr. Rankin.
Committee calls Mr. Rankin. Raise your right hand and be sworn. You solemnly swear the testimony you will give before this committee is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
What's your full name for the record?
Well, my full name is James Lee Rankin.
Mr. Rankin, what was your position with the Warren Commission?
I was General Counsel.
And could you give us an idea of what your duties were as General Counsel?
I had the executive responsibilities for the staff working under the Commission.
Were you in charge of the day-to-day operations of the Warren Commission staff?
Yes, I was.
How did it come about that you became General Counsel for the Commission?
I was called by Chief Justice Warren and asked whether I would be willing to serve as General Counsel for the Commission. I told him I'd have to call him back, and I finally said I would, but probably the rest of the commissioners would not want me, and he better find out whether they would wish to have me be General Counsel. He said he'd already found out before he asked me, and they were unanimous about my being the General Counsel. I then came down and was sworn in as counsel.
Was there any discussion at that time about the goals of the Commission?
The only discussion was that we were to try to find out who the assassin was and whether there was anyone else involved in it beyond the person who we found to be the one who committed the act.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I would ask that the chart that's already up marked JFK 476 be received as a committee exhibit.
Without objection, may be received.
Looking at that chart, which is on the extreme left, Mr. Rankin, it's marked the Warren Commission. Is that an accurate representation of the personnel who worked for the Warren Commission?
Yes, it is. It does not include all of the personnel, of course, but the upper layers of it does, and the commissioners.
Could you tell us how the investigation itself was organized?
I proposed a investigation that would consist of 5 parts, and went to the chairman, the Chief Justice, and the commissioners with that proposal, and it was accepted, and that's the way we proceeded.
And
they are all described on the chart there.
How did you determine what the 5 parts that it would be organized into, what they would be?
Well, it seemed to me a logical division of the responsibilities of trying to discharge our requirements under the executive order of the President.
Do you recall at this time what the 5 areas were?
Well, I wouldn't wish to miss any of them. If you have them, if you'll just recite them, I can tell you whether they're correct or not.
Okay. The facts of the assassination, the identity of the assassin, the background of Lee Harvey Oswald, conspiracy investigation, and death of Lee Harvey Oswald. Are those the 5 areas?
That's correct.
How many lawyers were assigned to each of these areas?
There were 2 on each of the areas.
Would it be fair to say that the Federal Bureau of Investigation did most of the investigation for the Warren Commission?
Well, that would be accurate as to proportions, if you mean by most the percentage-wise. But we used all of the intelligence agencies of the government before we got through, and sometimes we used one intelligence agency on matters that we were not satisfied concerning, which were already worked upon by another intelligence agency. So that we oftentimes wanted a double check or felt that there was some inaccuracies or were not completely satisfied and asked some other agency that had no parent relationship to check on the matter for us.
Whose decision was it to use federal agencies as opposed to hiring independent investigators?
That was a decision of the Commission, although I recommended that kind of a procedure because I described various possibilities of getting outside investigators and that it might take a long period of time to accumulate them, find out what their expertise was, and whether they could qualify to handle sensitive information in the government. And it might be a very long time before we could even get a staff going that could work on the matter, let alone have any progress on it.
In 1964, at the conclusion of the investigation, what was your opinion of the performance of the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
Well, as to their cooperation with us, I thought it was good. We were critical about some of the things that happened, about alerting the Secret Service about information that they knew about and that we learned they had not informed the Secret Service about. That is all in the report. But as far as not being frank and open with us and revealing what information they had, we assumed that they did that. I did at least, and I think the Commission did.
You've sort of begun to anticipate my next question, which is today, in 1978, with what you've learned over the course of the years, what is your opinion with respect to the performance of the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
Well, I've been very much disappointed on some of the things that have been revealed, and I have, of course, no personal knowledge about those matters. I have just read them in the press from the reports of investigations by the Senate committee and others. But I had a close relationship with J. Edgar Hoover while I was in the Department of Justice, and it was always friendly but also professional and I thought good, and I never believed that he would withhold information or have it withheld from anybody like the Commission, or that the FBI would do that. And it seemed to me, from my experience, that they were more professional than to do anything of that character. And when I learned that they were supposed to have known about plans for assassination that were underway in the CIA, according to the investigation of the Senate committee, and did not report it to us, and that we didn't receive any such information from the CIA, it was quite disheartening to me to believe and to know that that kind of conduct was a part of the action of our intelligence agencies at that high level.
I had originally asked the question as applying to the FBI, but your answer applies to the CIA and the FBI, is that correct?
Well, I think it's our experience as it's revealed by the investigation of the Senate committee with the CIA is worse than with the FBI, because the FBI apparently did not originate the assassination plans, and apparently the CIA did. So the FBI only happened on or were informed about such plans and then did not convey them to us. But with the CIA, they were apparently involved in them and did not alert us to the situation at all, give us any opportunity to take the action that we should have had the chance to of investigating that type of information.
As General Counsel of the Warren Commission, you had no knowledge whatsoever of the assassination plots against Fidel Castro?
That's true, I did not.
What were some of the political pressures, time pressures, that were exerted upon the Warren Commission staff?
Well, we had pressures from the beginning of the time element, because the country was anxious to know what had happened and whether there was any conspiracy involved. I was assured by the Chief Justice that it would only take me 2 to 3 months at the outside in this job, and that's all the time I would be away from my law practice. And of course I wished to get the job done correctly and properly, but also to get back to my other work. And on the other hand, the first meeting we had with the staff, I told them that our only client was the truth, and that was what we must search for and try to reveal. And I think we adhered to that we never departed from that standard. Any of the commission, or myself, or the staff, and we tried as conscientiously as possible to convey the information explicitly that we discovered.
The report, the final report, was completed in September of 1964. Was there any pressure to get that report out before the election in November?
I didn't think there was any pressure. There was an expression by some members of the commission that it would be better if the problem of the assassination and whether any conspiracy was involved and what had happened, who the assassin was, as the commission found, all of those questions were not injected into the various political conventions. But there was no indication at any time that we should try to get it out for any such purpose, and not adequately make a report or investigate whatever sources we were able to find.
Were there any pressures exerted not to find the foreign conspiracy because of the dire consequences that such a conspiracy might have for world peace?
None at all. There was a conscientious effort throughout to try to discover anything that would reveal that there was conspiratorial action about the assassination of the president.
On that question of a possible conspiracy, the Commission has been criticized over the years for not devoting enough time and effort and resources to investigating the question of whether there was a conspiracy to assassinate the president. Would you tell us, first, whether you believe that the Commission did devote adequate time and resources to that question? And second, would you give us an idea of how the Commission went about investigating whether there was a conspiracy?
Well, I think that they did an adequate job in that regard. The problem of what could be discovered concerning whatever happened in the Soviet and whether there was any involvement there was necessarily a very difficult matter because of the closed nature of their society. And our opportunity, even with the best penetration that we were able to learn of by our own intelligence people, to reach within that society and discover material that could be relied on was quite sparse, to say the least. Within the domestic community, we made great efforts, and we followed out as far as we thought there was any reason to believe that it was desirable, possibility of any Cuban involvement. If we had had the information from the CIA, we certainly would have run out those leads and tried to find out whatever we could in that area. But we were not given the advantage of that.
Another area that the Commission has received a good deal of criticism is that in some areas in the final report, the evidence was not strong enough to support the conclusions reached in that report. And there are certain staff memorandums where staff members, immediately prior to the issuance of the report, suggested that in certain areas they felt the evidence was not strong enough to support the conclusions. What would be your position to this in reply to this criticism?
I do not think it's a valid criticism. I examined, I think, every word of the report before it was printed, and I constantly tried to understate rather than overstate the findings and the position of the Commission on all of the various matters that it acted upon and reported upon. These positions were carefully reviewed by the commissioners in each one of them, and they argued them, and the staff presented such materials they had, and the commissioners examined them. They participated in hearings, and it was their disposition, so expressed, that the report not overstate what the Commission found and the evidence that would support it.
In connection with this issue of whether the report overstated the evidence, I'd like to read you a portion of from a deposition of Mr. David Slauson, one of the staff counsel, and he made this statement in 1978 when deposed by this committee. I stand corrected. I was at a hearing, an executive session hearing of this committee where he made the statement. He said, quote, "I think because Earl Warren was adamant, almost, that the Commission would make up its mind on what it thought was the truth, and then they would state it as much without qualification as they could. He wanted to lay at rest doubts. He made no secret of this on the staff. It was consistent with his philosophy as a judge." Do you agree with this statement by Mr. Slauson?
No, I don't. That was not in character for the Chief Justice in my experience with him. He was explicit that he thought we should not spare any effort in trying to find out the answer to the question of whether or not there was any other involvement than Oswald in the assassination. But with regard to what we should say about it, or report about it, he was always very vehement and expressive that we should tell it exactly as it was.
As you sit here today, do you still believe the conclusions of the Warren Commission to be correct?
I do.
In retrospect, what, if anything, should have been done differently in the Warren Commission's investigation?
Well, as I've said, if we had the information from the CIA and FBI, certainly those leads should have been followed out to discover whether or not there was anything of conspiratorial nature involved. I assume that this committee has been doing that, and that if you had anything of that kind, we would know it by now, one way or another. But otherwise, it's been suggested we could have taken a longer time, and of course, you could go on and on for years on anything of that kind. But I think there are reasonable limits, and the Congress, I'm sure, recognizes that. And I think the American people do, that you can't spend forever on matters of that kind. And there's a limit to the amount of money that the people would want to spend on such a matter, all within reasonable limits, I think. We never had any difficulty, any problems about money. We were assured that by the President that out of the presidential funds we would receive any money we needed. And so we were never at any time told that we were to limit ourselves in that regard. Nevertheless, we would certainly not have wanted the staff just staying on and on, nitpicking at a lot of little things that didn't have apparently any prospect of success.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
All right, thank you. You say you have no further questions? Okay. Thank you, Counsel. Procedure at this point would be the Chair will recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Sawyer, for such time as he may consume, after which we will go to the 5-minute rule. Mr. Sawyer.
Counsel, Mr. Rankin, has the fact that the Warren Commission report, according to all polls, received such poor acceptance by the American people given you any pause to reflect on whether you went about it correctly or not?
Not really. You know, as a part of my job as General Counsel, I researched all of the assassinations and a number in regard to other countries, and went into the materials that were available about the assassination of President Lincoln, and I discovered that there was a large body of opinion that didn't believe any of the findings about Lincoln's assassination, about other people that had been assassinated, and that apparently is a lot of anybody that works in this kind of a field.
Did you make any effort, either as a staff or to your knowledge as a commission, to determine just where Oswald was going at the time he was intercepted by Officer Tippit?
We speculated on it, but speculations weren't worth much.
Well, did you come to any reasonable hypothesis as to where he was going?
We all agreed that he was on his way to try to escape, but where, we didn't know. And everything from that point on was just one person's guess against another's.
Of course, I presume you're aware that the direction in which he was heading at the time that he was confronted by Tippit kind of led to nowhere with respect to either escape routes or anything, just out in the neighborhood.
Well, we didn't think that was really the complete answer, because at that point he was very hard pressed, and we thought he was more in the posture of just running.
Well, did you find out that Jack Ruby's apartment was about 2 or 3 blocks up the street on the direct route he was going?
Yes.
Did you also find out that in the Dallas newspaper announcement of the President's visit, that on the same page was the identity of an informant who had substantially destroyed the Communist Party in Texas by informing to the FBI, and he was identified, and he lived just about 2 blocks up the street on the direct route he was going also?
I don't recall that I was aware of that.
But other than just the fact that on this some 14.5 or 15-minute walk he had taken through neighborhoods after leaving his rooming house, other than just running or escaping, you had formed no hypothesis at all on where he may have been going or what his intent may have been?
That is true, we did not.
Now, with respect, as you are undoubtedly aware, much of the criticism of the Warren Commission report and much of the bases of the various critics who have written extensively on the subject has been centered about, for one thing, and principally, the single bullet theory and the fact that if that weren't valid, time did not permit of one assassin. You made a decision, or you and the commission, not to allow access to the autopsy information. Are you still satisfied with that decision as being a sound one?
Yes, I am. I think it's been revealed the basis of the decision, and that the Kennedy family did not wish to have the pictures of the president as shown by the x-rays and the other pictures after the assassination attempt as the way that the American people in the world would remember the dead president. And we thought we had good evidence from the doctors who were involved at the hospital in Dallas and also at the autopsy. And we did not want the president's memory to be presented in that manner. And we'd already promised the American people, that the commission had, that everything that they obtained, except for such matters that involve national security, would be made available to them. So we would have to publish if we made it available. So in light of that, I think the choice that was made was correct, and I don't think it's done any harm. And I still would hate to have published throughout the world those pictures as a remembrance of our president.
Well, on the other hand, Mr. Rankin, this committee staff and the committee made all of that original material available to a panel of pathologists. But we did not feel any necessity to make the pictures themselves public. To the extent they were relevant, we had drawings made from the original and produced them, and were able, I feel, to have totally laid at rest the one bullet theory because of the ability to determine the points of entry of wounds and exits, and to be able to project back from those wounds to locations from which firings occurred. And I don't think we were in any way compelled to or did do anything either distasteful or shocking at all as far as our public exhibitions of the situation were concerned. Now,
as far as I know, you haven't promised the American people that you would give them everything that you received. Maybe you have, I'm not aware of it. But we had, the commission had, and they would not have been willing to cover up anything or withhold anything after such a promise.
Well, do you feel then that you may have made an error in promising to make all original material available, or do you feel you may have made an error in not making the material available to pathologists?
No, I don't think either one of them. I think that if we hadn't promised the people and done what we did about giving them everything that the commission examined that was not involved in national security, the commission's work would have had little credence with the people. And I think that once having done that, the commission couldn't say, well, we did everything but this, and this, and this, and that we aren't going to give you.
Well, in other words, then, as I understand you, because you'd made this commitment and then didn't feel like this was material you wanted to make public for taste reasons or feeling reasons, you just didn't even look at it then.
No,
you let this promise govern your investigation?
There was another factor, that this was merely additional evidence cumulative. The evidence of the doctors was equally good as far as the law goes, and was of first quality, so that it wasn't as though we were without evidence.
No, but based on the testimony of those doctors and the evidence developed, they were, for example, like 4 inches off on the point of entry of the head wound, which, of course, projected would be a horrendous error.
I don't know that. I've heard that your staff has discovered that, and that Dr. Humes has admitted that he was that much off. At the time, it was, and since, until I heard that, it was difficult to imagine that a man conducting an autopsy could make that kind of mistakes when he was observing the body that he was examining and so forth.
Well, now that you've heard that, are you still satisfied with the decision not to even allow access to the X-rays and autopsy original data?
I think I would not do that if you combine with that the obligation to publish it, because I think that is the importance of President Kennedy to the people of this country and to the world as an American public leader is, I think, very valuable, even today.
Well, would you have taken that position vis-a-vis any relevant information that if you decided that either because of embarrassment or damage it might do to the FBI or the CIA or international relations or whatever, that because of this self-imposed obligation to publish in general, you just then followed the proposition of not even looking at it?
No, and I think our work shows that we didn't.
Are you still happy with your decision to use the FBI as your sole investigative source?
Well, that doesn't meet or doesn't conform to my testimony, in my opinion. I thought I tried to make it plain that we used all of the intelligence agencies of the government. And we used the Secret Service and others, military intelligence, to check back on the FBI from time to time. We also had a couple of investigators who were not important in the whole scheme of things. They couldn't do enough. But we had many thousands of investigations that the FBI made. And if we had had a force to equal the number of man-hours that we used the FBI, the Secret Service, the military intelligence, the cryptology people, and all the others that we used in the government, there would have been many thousands. And I think it would have been impossible, and we wouldn't have gotten out a report for years.
But as you probably know now, that information was withheld by the FBI with respect to the so-called Hosty note from Oswald threatening to burn down a police station, or allegedly so.
Yes, but Congressman, if you look back at that period, all of us, didn't believe the FBI was capable of that kind of conduct. At least I didn't, and none of the commissioners did. And I think that all of our ideas about what people in government are capable of and do has changed. But back then, we didn't think they would do such things.
Did you receive any advice from the FBI about the 17 agents that were subjected to administrative discipline because of their mishandling of the pre-assassination information about Ruby?
No, I didn't.
Not Ruby, Oswald?
Yes. And I think that's very shocking, too. I think we were entitled to that information and a frank disclosure by Mr. Hoover that he felt that they should be disciplined and why, and that we should have been able to go into that. and try to discover if it had any effect on our work.
And I assume you feel the same way about the CIA's non-disclosure of the alleged assassination plots that they may have participated in vis-a-vis Castro?
I do.
Now, I'm interested in the fact that you had received advice that Yuri Nasenko, a KGB officer who had defected, was available and was willing to testify, had you not, before the Warren Commission?
Yes, I had.
And that he professed to have first-hand knowledge of Oswald's activity in Russia during the period that Oswald was in Russia.
Congressman, you didn't include in your statement, as I understood it, that the CIA had told us that he was a fake and not a real KGB officer, and that he was probably just planted on us. That was the information we got from the CIA about him. And it was in light of that we did not call him, because we thought, the commission thought, that they would just be the dupes of such a plan if that was true. Now, we certainly didn't have the expertise, even with Alan Dulles on the commission, to be able to judge whether a man was truly a KGB agent or a plant. And when they, as the people in the government that ought to know such things, spent a lifetime at that work, told us that, we felt, the commission felt, that there was no purpose and they didn't want to be used to try to carry out any information that the KGB or anybody else would be interested in having distributed to the American people through the commission by somebody that was making a dupe of them.
Well, did you opt to have the man at least interviewed by one of the staff to form a judgment yourselves?
No. I had nobody on the staff, and I had no commissioner. I don't think Alan Dulles could have done it, who could have had the skill, expertise, to make that kind of a judgment. Our information was that CIA put a group working on him to try to examine all of his background and find out whether he had enough knowledge of various events and matters within the Soviet picture to be a true KGB agent. And we were led to believe, or at least I was, that was my belief, that these people had sufficient knowledge and skill that was required to determine anything of that kind.
So that then, because of the doubt cast on his veracity by the CIA, you opted not to even have the staff talk to him or even check what he had to say. Is that right?
Well, they weren't telling us the veracity is whether he was truthful or not, except insofar as he was representing that he was a KGB agent. They were telling us that he was not a real agent. And that seemed to me very important with regard to what he might have to say about the matter.
You are aware that the CIA has now reversed themselves totally on that position, I assume?
Yes, but I'm shocked by the way they arrived at it and the procedures they apparently went through from some of your programs.
Are you satisfied with the decision to hold all in executive session hearings rather than public hearings?
Well,
do you think that may have contributed to the lack of acceptance of the report?
We had one open hearing.
That was because Mark Lane demanded
that was
right.
Mark Lane, and I think you had similar experiences.
Who would naturally demand a public hearing, right?
And I didn't think it helped with your hearing, although I think you handled it well in regard to some of the problems that developed.
as some people that watched it said, that Mr. Lane had done for the legal profession what the Boston Strangler did for the door-to-door salesman.
We had no indication by the public that they were unhappy with our failure to have more open hearings. I can't answer the question about whether it would have helped, but I have been impressed that insofar as this committee has had open hearings, they have seemed to have gone well, and reaction that I've heard from various people to some of the evidence has been impressive, that they've been convinced by some of it, and of course they weren't convinced by all of it, but you can't expect that.
Another thing that I was interested in is that in the conference or interview or interrogation, whichever, that President Ford and the Chief Justice and some staff members had with Mr. Ruby while he was incarcerated in Dallas, he said, according to the transcript, substantially, that he'd like to tell the whole truth, but he can't tell them the whole truth while he's in Dallas, and if they would transport him to Washington, he would tell the whole truth. Was any follow-up ever done of that at all by the staff or otherwise?
No, there wasn't. We were all convinced that Ruby was interested in a trip to Washington rather than how much he could enlighten the commission. And it seemed quite apparent when you observed him and his approach to the whole suggestion.
Were you there at the time?
Yes.
And is that the impression you got individually, too?
Yes. Yes, I thought that he was quite enamored with the idea of coming to Washington, and he even wanted to see the president. And it was easy to imagine what that would all develop into if you got started in it.
There were no follow-up attempts, though, to try to elucidate that situation.
No, there were not.
Now, was any check ever made or any check requested by the commission to have the possible organized crime participation in this situation investigated?
Well, we did the checking that is revealed by our report in the appendices in that regard. We didn't find enough possible connection to go beyond what we did. When I heard about some of the information that the Senate committee had developed about the possible use of personalities from organized crime in connection with the proposed assassinations, or efforts or plans or whatever you want to call that activity, it did disturb me some as to that aspect, and I said to some of your staff, I assumed that they were following up on that and run that out to be sure that they ran out to the end of it.
Well, the FBI liaison officer who appeared before this committee and who was acting as the sort of sole or principal liaison between the FBI and the commission said that they had never involved or never asked to and never did involve their organized crime section of the FBI in the matter. Is that consistent with your recollection of it?
That is, yes.
And so you did not have access to what electronic surveillance may have been available in that section that may have related to their interest in doing away with President Kennedy. Am I correct on that?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Rankin, it appears to me that there are two things that the commission was looking for and could find neither. One was a motive for Lee Harvey Oswald to commit the crime, and the second was the question of whether there was or was not a conspiracy. Would that be true? The Commission was trying to ascertain the facts relative to those two things.
Well, it's true they were. I felt they did find an answer to the first one that you described, that they felt that there was no motive beyond Oswald's own ambition for notoriety and position and so forth that was gone into at some length in the report.
Well, let me ask you this. Would whatever his activities were in Soviet Russia, do you think that it's possible that that could have provided some insight into motivation by way of background?
I don't think so beyond what we presented. Now, I'm quite aware, as I think the report shows, that we only said that we were unable to discover any such information about conspiracy or conspiratorial activity. What else he might have done that we never could get any information about through our efforts through the State Department or CIA or anyone else is just a matter of speculation.
Well, it would seem that in that area, that's where Yuri Nusenko would have been very important to the Commission in terms of what he was able to tell the CIA about Oswald while he's in Soviet Russia, would it not?
Well, if they got anything from him, when they reported to us, they didn't report that they got any word about his associations with Oswald or knowledge about Oswald or anything like that.
Do I understand from what you're saying that, I think we're talking about the CIA, are we not?
Yes.
All right. Tell us what they did tell you.
My recollection,
that Nusenko told them about Oswald in Russia.
They were satisfied he was not a KGB officer. They felt that he was a plant, that he was sent in for some purpose that they didn't know to try to participate. They said they felt he wasn't believable about anything that he would claim about Oswald or knowledge about him.
And that he was not himself a bona fide defector then, I suppose.
Yeah, that's correct. That's what they said.
I see. Did they tell you, though, what he had told them that he knew about Oswald?
They didn't go into any detail about what he said. They said that he just wasn't believable.
WFCR, Emma.
Now, when you say they, can you tell us specifically whom you're talking about at CIA?
Well, I can't remember the names now. It seemed to me, though, looking back on it, that it was their specialists in Soviet matters. And I think they had, my recollection is they had a number of them. And it wasn't just one man, it was a teamwork of some kind.
Okay. Now, did you ever have any conversation with Richard Helms about Nusenko?
My recollection is he supported that position, that there was no purpose in trying to have Nusenko before the commission or to inquire what he knew because he wasn't believable.
Okay. Did anyone ever tell you that Nusenko had said that while he was in Soviet Russia, that 2 suitcases full of documents on Oswald were flown up from Minsk to the Russian capital immediately after the assassination? Did they ever tell you that?
I don't remember anything like that.
Probabilities are that if you were told something like that, you would have recalled it.
Yes, it's quite impressive.
Right.
You'd want to see what was in those suitcases if you'd heard it, I'm sure.
That is correct. And that is part of the information Nosenko has given this committee. Okay. I have no further questions. Gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Pryor.
Just a couple of questions, Mr. Chairman, relating to the problems that might have been created by using the FBI as your major investigative arm. Early on in the work of the commission, I believe it did come to your attention, allegations came to your attention that Lee Harvey Oswald might have been an FBI agent. Is that right?
That's correct.
How were you able to investigate the truth or falsity of that charge? What did you do to investigate?
Well, when that information came to my attention and then to the commission's, we were very much shocked about it. And the commission had deliberations in which they tried to determine what was the best approach to try to find out the fact. And they decided that we should make direct inquiries to J. Edgar Hoover. The problem was not, as I recall it, whether Oswald was ever listed as an agent in their records, because, as I recall, we checked that out, and he was not. But my recollection is that this involved the question of whether he might have been a numbered personality that the FBI had, where the name of the individual is not revealed, and he thus has a cover, and it could be concealed. And we examined the possibility that we could try to go into their records and examine every person, identify every person who had a number. And we were assured that that involved a large number of personalities. And that the FBI was greatly disturbed about taking the cover off of all those agents that they had established over a long term of years, and revealing their names to all of the staff as well as the commissioners, which I couldn't assure them would not happen in that kind of a process. So the commission finally determined that they would accept J. Edgar Hoover's personal assurance by affidavit that Oswald had never been an informer or agent of the FBI, and that was given.
Well, you were somewhat in the position of asking the FBI to investigate itself, or go into the innkeeper to ask whether the wine was good or not. Let me ask one other question.
At that time, Congressman, that didn't seem so impossible as it might today.
Yes, I think your answer to an earlier question has demonstrated a certain fall from innocence that we've all had since that time. Things are now believable which we would not have thought believable at that time.
That's correct.
Threshold of disbelief has gone up quite a bit. Let me ask you one other thing. The FBI reached a conclusion in their report that was made 17 days after the assassination that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin. Don't you think that would have had some chilling effect would have dampened the incentive of FBI agents in following out the question of a conspiracy where his organization had already declared itself to the effect that there was no conspiracy.
I think that's true, but we always assumed that. We started out knowing the FBI had already decided who the assassin was and that no one else was involved, and we knew that was the agency position. It was very evident. But we didn't rely on anything like that. We sought detailed evidence. And if we didn't get the evidence we asked for, we sent them back time after time to get it. And we treated their report, in which they promptly found Oswald as the assassin and there was no conspiracy, as though that's just an interesting document, but we're not here for that, to ratify that. We're to find out if it's true. And I think we were probably quite offensive, especially some of the younger members of our staff who looked forward to the opportunity of finding the FBI was wrong, at least on as much as they could find. So that oftentimes they were challenging, and I had difficulty with some of our relationships because of that. I don't think it affected our people at all, but of course I recognize that it would have been lèse-majesty for anybody to tell that to Mr. Hoover. The report was wrong.
Just one final question on the problems that could arise where you use the FBI as your major investigative arm. You told Mr. Sawyer, I believe, that you did not know about the destruction of the Hosty note. Do you think if you had independent investigators rather than relying on the FBI that you might have learned about the destruction of that note?
Well, there's always the possibility that we might. There seems to me there could have been possibility that it might have leaked out some way from the FBI, but it didn't. And I think that it would have been helpful to know that, although I don't suppose we would have changed about using the FBI and the other government intelligence forces.
Thank you, Mr. Rankin.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Devine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rankin, you were in Dallas with Chief Justice Warren and President Ford on the occasion of the interview with Jack Ruby?
Yes.
Did you participate in the questioning of him, or were you merely present? If you recall.
Well, it's hard to recall because I know I questioned him some, but whether I did the general examination, I can't now recall.
He indicated at that time, if you were in the room this morning when President Ford testified, that Ruby requested that he be brought to Washington in order that he might tell the full and the true story. And the President said that after discussing it with the Commission and the Commission staff, that they felt that no meaningful purpose would be served by doing that. Did you agree in that decision?
Yes.
Do you agree at this time that that was a proper decision?
Yes. As I said earlier, when Congressman Sawyer asked me, I felt that he really wanted a trip to Washington rather than to help us in our problems.
In your interrogation or in the files of the Commission and having interrogated Jack Ruby, did the Commission ever come to a conclusion as to his motive in shooting Lee Harvey Oswald?
I don't think they were ever satisfied as to what his motive was.
Did not the commission receive testimony that Ruby was known in Dallas as a, quote, police buff, end of quote, that he had a habit of hanging around police headquarters and that his presence there was not unusual?
That's correct.
And was there not also testimony before the commission, or at least reported to the commission, that Ruby's motive probably was that as an obscure nightclub operator of some questionable reputation, that he thought he would become a national hero if he killed the person that assassinated the president?
I think that's true. I'm not sure that the commission was satisfied that that was the answer.
Does that seem to make some degree of logic to you as chief counsel of the commission?
Well, it's always seemed to me that it was quite a step for a man to take, with all the risks that were involved, just for that kind of a purpose.
I don't believe the commission, in its very thorough investigation, ever tied Oswald and Ruby together in any association, did they?
They did not.
In another area, Mr. Rankin, there was some testimony this morning about 17 or so FBI agents being subjected to disciplinary administrative procedures within the Bureau for lack of discretion or failure to meet the necessary standards on the pre-assassination investigation of Oswald and the fact that he was never placed on the security index. Were you aware of this administrative action within the Bureau?
No, I was not. My relations with Mr. Hoover deteriorated a great deal after the report came out, and I was quite surprised to learn that he took this position with the agents in light of his severe criticism of me and the report, when it appeared to me that this action was quite confirmatory of some of the criticism that the commission had in the report about some of the failures of the FBI in its liaison with the Secret Service and so forth.
Well, had you known of this action prior to the conclusion of the final report of the commission, do you think that would have affected the investigation in any way, or had led it in any way to different results or conclusions?
I don't think it would have changed the results or conclusions. I think that if we had been aware of it, we would have wanted to inquire about each one of the situations and see if there was anything there that could help us in our investigation.
It wasn't surprising to you, was it, Mr. Rankin, with your vast experience in and out of government, to recognize that administrative steps are taken within many government agencies, disciplinary steps are taken without airing the laundry publicly?
No, but I was naive enough with regard to this particular task as general counsel to think that when the President of the United States told everybody to cooperate with us, that they would understand that that was an order and mandate and part of the law that governed public servants, and that they would do it. And it seemed to me that the question of what they failed to do in each of these instances was a matter that would be of interest to the commission and each of the commissioners, and that Mr. Hoover had an obligation on his own to inform us and let us take whatever proper action the commission thought should be taken to find out what acts were being criticized and whether there was something that would affect the commission's work.
Fine. Finally, Mr. Rankin, recognizing that nearly 15 years have intervened since the event and 14 years since the filing of the Warren Commission report, learning the things that you have learned during the intervening period, the new technical exotic crime detection techniques that have developed additional witnesses that were not available to you. The meeting of the Rockefeller Committee, the Church Committee, the Assassinations Committee, and all. As you sit here today, do you feel that the Warren Commission, had they had the benefit of all of this additional information, would have reached a conclusion different than that which you actually did?
No, I think that the Commission would not have arrived at any different conclusions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Dodd.
Mr. Chairman, in light of the fact that I arrived a little bit after Mr. Rankin completed his statement, I'll pass for the moment if I can.
Gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Fithy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rankin, we want to thank you for coming and for cooperating with our committee. I have several questions that I'd like to pursue if time permits, and I might have to beg of the chairman some additional time. First, I would like to ask whether or not the commission, and yourself in particular, reviewed and approved the firearms tests that were administered by the FBI on the Mannlicher Carcano that was alleged to be the Oswald weapon.
Yes.
And was a part of that test to determine how fast it could be fired?
That's right.
And the FBI performed those tests?
Yes.
Do you remember what the results were?
I remember that the results were positive, that the 3 bullets could have been fired within the time limits that are, I think, were computed on the Zapruder film.
The 2.3, or as one witness, I believe, had it 2.25 seconds between firings as the minimum time.
That's
it's your impression that the 3 shots would fit in to that particular sequence. And is it also your understanding that the firearms experts who performed these tests made use of the telescopic sight?
That's right.
Did the commission ever order firing the tests of the weapon without the scope?
I don't recall that they did.
Did it ever occur to anybody on the commission that it might have been fired without the scope?
I don't think any of the commissioners, in discussing it, thought that anybody could have shot with that accuracy without the scope.
Well, after you heard Governor Conley, did this give you any problems then?
No.
Trying to square his testimony with the FBI test?
I heard him before, when he testified before the commission. And
I meant at that time, at the commission testimony.
I think he is just mistaken, and I think that the more evidence that's adduced will establish that where he was, he had to be shot by that same bullet.
Well, now, did the commission's understanding of the firing time of the Oswald weapon cause any problems in interpreting other evidence, including the Zapruder film or eyewitnesses' accounts?
I don't recall any. If you could refresh my memory.
Well, you recall that Governor Conley said he heard a shot and he turned.
Yes.
And the Zapruder film shows that turning, which tends to corroborate what the governor said. I mean, just to the layman. And I'm wondering if you had any problem with that.
Well, the fact that he turned, I think, is well established by the film. Whether he heard the shot after he'd been shot isn't established by the Zapruder film.
Well, now, if it can, and as it has in a tentative way by this committee, be established that the weapon can be fired with pretty good accuracy and a lot faster than the FBI said. If you had that information, what would this have done to your sort of adjustment of your interpretation of the evidence?
Well, I don't think it would have changed unless you're thinking of something that I'm not. We took into account, the commission did, that there were 3 casings there, and that there was testimony about 3 shots and other factors, along with the time element.
But when there were also conflicting testimony, though I believe not given as much credibility by you and your staff and the commission, that indicated that eyewitness accounts heard other shots from other areas, particularly the grassy knoll area. Wouldn't your firing time limitation of necessity almost have to come to bear on that kind of testimony beyond the 3 cartridge that you found?
We never thought that the testimony of shots from other points was impressive in light of the wounds.
I would ask either unanimous consent to let me finish up this line of questioning, but I do have another area I'd like to question in after everybody else has completed, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Without objection.
Well, it just seems to me that someone, somewhere, who had a modicum of experience with firearms would have discovered right off, even if you go down to the archives today and look at the rifle, it's no particularly difficult problem to pick it up and look at it and see that it can be fired without the telescopic sight. And anybody who's ever fired with a scope would know that you can fire a lot faster if you're looking for a moving target. You don't have to find it in the scope. And if it can, in fact, be fired faster. Now, for 15 years, we've been told it couldn't be fired faster. We now know that is not true. And it seems to me that someone on the commission having some evidence which appears to me not to be able to fit into the 2.25, which is the minimum time of the FBI, might have requested another kind of test firing. And I'm curious that it did not occur to a single person, either on the commission, on your staff, in the FBI, or anywhere else along the line. I guess my final question is, was there no consideration given by the commission, or as far as you know by the FBI, to another kind of test firing of that weapon?
Not that I know of. Of course, there are also problems of the leaves on the trees and how you fit them in, and the point where the Zapruder film showed the impact had to be, that is, that it had to be within certain spaces. All of that had to be fitted in too. So you're not just free to say, well, I can shoot this weapon so many times within so many minutes. There are many other problems that you have to deal with and fit within.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you, Mr. Rankin. I do have some other areas, but Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to make sure that we have in the record at this point that our own final test firings will become a part of this record as they are completed.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Edgar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for not being here during the other questioning of you, Mr. Rankin, but I do have some questions that grow out of earlier discussions about the way in which the Warren Commission began its efforts. You have indicated, I think, that within a relatively short period of time after the assassination, the Warren Commission was formed And the Warren Commission did put a document out, did they not, indicating that Lee Harvey Oswald was essentially the lone assassin shortly after the beginning of the commission?
Not that I recall.
Well, not necessarily a lone assassin, but that he was the assassin. Is that correct?
I don't remember that either.
When was the first time that the Warren Commission went public with any of their preliminary findings?
I just don't recall.
Well, let me ask it in a different way. Did the Warren Commission have an investigative plan?
Yes.
How was that plan developed?
It was developed by my making a draft of an idea and submitting it to the Commission for its acceptance or modification or rejection.
The members of the Commission had an opportunity to review the plan and decide where the investigation and study would go.
That's right.
In making that plan, did you bring in the FBI or the CIA to help and assist you in areas of investigation such as conspiracy?
No.
At any time in the beginning phases of the Warren Commission study, did you bring in the FBI and the CIA and the Secret Service to try to coordinate what information they had available to them and have a discussion among them about what information would be available to them?
No, I didn't. At that period of time, the relations between the Secret Service and the FBI were materially strained in connection with what happened and the fact that the president had been assassinated, and there was some feeling that neither one had done themselves proud in connection with the whole event.
Wouldn't it have been a relevant possibility to bring them together, to put aside those bickerings and differences, and to say, now that the assassination has taken place and the Warren Commission has been formed, we now have to provide to the American public the most accurate information of what was available to us at the time of the death and what transpired following the assassination?
I don't think so, because I think it would have appeared that we were putting them under the domination of the FBI. The FBI had already come forward with their report in which they said that Oswald was the assassin and there was no conspiracy involved. And that had leaked out. And to have brought the different groups together, it would seem to me, the first place, the Secret Service is much smaller, less powerful, and...
But wouldn't that have given the Secret Service and the CIA an opportunity to pose an alternative possibility to the already established rumor of the FBI?
No, because I gave each of them in separate discussions with the directors ample opportunity to suggest anything that they wanted to and ask for their help in every way possible.
Mr. Chairman, just one additional question, if I may. May I ask unanimous consent to proceed?
The gentleman is recognized.
Just one final question. In December and January of 1963 and 64, when the FBI was disciplining 17 individuals for their role in the pre-assassination information of Lee Harvey Oswald, was that information made known to you in December and January of 63 and 64?
No, it was not.
Was it made known to you at any time during the Warren Commission?
No, it was not.
Thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. McKinney.
You were basically in charge, Mr. Rankin, were you not, of assignments of the staff?
Yes.
I had, and was it true that that Counsel Hubert and Griffin were essentially assigned to the investigation of Jack Ruby?
Yes.
Why, under those conditions, and whose decision was it that they then did not go to Dallas to interview Jack Ruby when the Chief Justice and Congressman Ford went?
I think it was discussion by myself with the Chief Justice and former President Ford, and they said, this matter is of sufficient importance, we want you to do the examination.
But in essence, you were required to have a generalized knowledge of where everything that was happening, rather than a specific of Jack Ruby himself.
Well, I was watching it in detail in every area, too. I had to.
I think one of the criticisms of the Commission report has been the in-depth or the depth of the Ruby investigation, and there have been many critics who question why the two counsels who were charged with investigating Jack Ruby were not present at the time he was questioned extensively in Dallas.
Well, I don't think the criticism relates itself to the examination of Ruby. The criticism is whether or not the various leads were followed to the extent that they should have been. And that was a function that they both had.
In other words, you depended on their following through on Jack Ruby as to, for instance, on the question of his ties to organized crime, rather than on the FBI doing that? Or did you depend on both?
Both.
When did you become aware of the animosity of the FBI, or at least of J. Edgar Hoover, towards the Warren Commission? It's expressed, quite frankly, in what we've listed as Kennedy Exhibit 471, which is the Belmont to Tolson letter, in which point it's just basically pretty well stated that the FBI is not going to send liaison to the Warren Commission's meeting called by the Chief Justice, that at the request of Attorney General Katzenbach that he be briefed so that at least he could even answer questions. I believe Mr. Belmont states that would be very undesirable because there was really only one answer to that. Is the question, if the question is raised is what the FBI is doing, there's a very simple answer, namely that we are pressing the investigation and the writing of the report, and this is our major goal. Until that is completed, there's nothing we can contribute. In other words, the Chief Justice of the United States of America, the head of a presidential commission investigating the assassination of the President of the United States, was in essence told to forget it when he was asked by the FBI when he asked the FBI to have a liaison person there. How did you react to that?
Well, I tried to avoid an open fight. It was obvious to me that I certainly had a reluctant relationship with the FBI in many respects, and I was also making unreasonable demands every day upon them. And
excuse me, is that your wording, unreasonable demands, or would that be the Bureau's wording?
That's my wording too. It was unreasonable, but I couldn't do anything else. I needed that help. The staff needed it, and the commission needed it. And we didn't have enough other intelligence agencies to just forget about the FBI. And they had people stationed in various parts of the country that was logical to use. The Secret Service had people occasionally in various places, but they didn't have them stationed there all the time. And the FBI had a great group of personnel that could be used if they would be cooperative and help. So I was constantly asking for hundreds and sometimes many times hundreds of investigations in places all over the country. And as soon as I got the reports on that and the responses, I'd ask for some more. And I'd ask for more complete reports on the ones that I thought were unsatisfactory. Now that in itself made a very difficult relationship, and I don't blame them for feeling that they were being ridden pretty hard, which was true. But we never got to the place where they either apparently dared or would say they wouldn't do it. And as long as they didn't, I kept on, and then I had to be careful to watch everything they did to see that I was getting something worthwhile and that it was well done. And I knew pretty well what an FBI agent was capable of doing from my experience in the department, and I knew when it wasn't up to standard. So when it wasn't up to standard, it just came back to them. This got to be done. Get another agent on them if you can't get it done right.
But this was an actual memorandum dated the December 3rd of 1963, right at the very beginning, and there's a clear implication that the FBI just was not going to cooperate with any preliminary facts, nor were they going to send anyone to answer any questions. Didn't you find this? Wasn't any attempt made at that point with this sort of dramatic refusal to have anyone in a higher position in the government, such as the Attorney General or the President of the United States, turn around to Mr. Hoover and say, cooperate? In the terms of at least sending a liaison person, that's the one question here.
I don't know in my experience with government that anybody's ever done that with Mr. Hoover during his lifetime.
Well, I would think almost nobody would have done it, because I'm sure Mr. Hoover had something on all of us. But at the same time, I also recognize the Chief Justice of the United States, Earl Warren, as a rather controversial and opinionated gentleman who didn't like to take orders from anybody. And I just find it amazing, and since you were chief counsel between these two, that in essence the Chief Justice would sit back and take this sort of cavalier, we're not going to do it, from a sub-agency of the United States government.
Well, I think the Chief Justice was shrewd enough to realize that the way to handle that was to put him to the test and see whether he would refuse. And when it came down to actually doing the work, they never did refuse.
So even though the attitude was wrong, the actions were all right, so that it was shunted aside.
Yes, now, except for these things they didn't tell us. Well, it's apparent now that there are certain things they withheld from us, and that's something different.
Whole other catalog of horrors, which I think some of my colleagues have well addressed for the record. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Rankin.
Stu, on your comment that Mr. Hoover had something on all of us, someone said, speak for yourself. I asked that the clerk mark the exhibit I have handed her as JFK F449 and request that she show it to the witness, please.
Clerk Elizabeth Burning is bringing the exhibit to Mr. Rankin. And he's examining it now. Those bells you hear are bells calling members of Congress to the floor, and although the committee session continues, they stagger their votes and go, several of them at a time. When they return, others leave and go to vote. Mr. Rankin is still examining the exhibit while Chairman Stokes waits for a few moments. Nicholas Katzenbach, who's scheduled to be the next witness, came into the room a little while ago. He is now, if memory serves me correctly, counsel for IBM. He, of course, was Attorney General of the United States, and at the time of the Kennedy assassination was Deputy Attorney General and headed pretty much the Department of Justice as the de facto Attorney General while Bobby Kennedy took over arrangements for the burial and mourning of his brother. As I mentioned, J. Lee Rankin, the witness at the moment, is examining an exhibit that was handed to him moments ago at the request of Chairman Lewis Stokes.
You know, Rankin's testimony has been in marked contrast to Gerald Ford's testimony this morning, whereas Ford gave a, well, what can we do about it attitude when asked about the FBI. Rankin has been very critical of Hoover and the FBI for withholding key documents. He's also blamed the CIA for withholding key information. But he stopped short of saying that would have changed the outcome of the Warren Commission investigation.
That's right. He said it would have led to further investigation along the lines of the Cuban connection, that is, the knowledge that there had been CIA assassination plots would have led the Warren Commission to look further at the possibility that Cubans might have been involved in the Kennedy assassination. And he said also the fact that the Mafia had been involved in those assassination plots against Castro would have led the Warren Commission to look further into the possibility that organized crime, which had been the object of an intensive campaign by the Kennedy administration, that organized crime might have somehow been involved in the Kennedy assassination.
And Rankin made a point that we've heard over and over again today from Warren Commission members, that it was a different time back in the 60s. It was an age of innocence, a time when nobody thought of questioning the FBI, the CIA, questioning their veracity. Rankin says it never occurred to him that the FBI would have withheld key documents. Hoover was one of the most respected men in the country. Both the FBI and the CIA were highly regarded organizations. The horror stories that would come in Senate investigations of the 70s were way over the horizon. And, of course, now, if the Warren Commission were meeting, I suppose it would have had stricter guidelines on FBI cooperation.
And people were afraid of J. Edgar Hoover, as Congressman McKinney noted just a few moments ago.
Chair requests unanimous consent that this document be made a part of the record at this point, and without objection is so ordered. Mr. Rankin, have you had a chance to review this document?
I have.
Okay. And can you tell us what it is?
It's a communication from William T. Coleman, Jr. and W. David Slauson to the Commission regarding Mr. Nosenko.
Okay. And was a copy of this document provided to you, and does it indicate thereon?
It does, yes.
All right. Now, this document, or this memorandum, was prepared from information furnished on whom?
It was furnished to, regarding Oswald, is that what you mean?
Well, that's subject matter of the memo.
No, it was concerning what the FBI had learned from Nosenko about what he claimed he knew about Oswald.
Right. And this was a 5-page document prepared by members of your commission staff.
That's right.
And my understanding is that Nosenko was in the possession of the CIA.
That's right.
And that this memorandum was prepared as a result of an interview of Nosenko by the FBI.
Yes.
Is that correct? Right.
Apparently. I don't know how they ever got to him because they were not supposed to have jurisdiction in their area, but...
Well, our understanding is that the FBI would have to submit to the CIA the questions they wanted to ask Nosenko. CIA would then ask Nosenko those questions and submit his answers back to the FBI. Is that your recollection of the procedure?
No, I don't know what the proceedings were.
I see. But at any rate, with reference to this memorandum, can you give us some idea of how heavily the Commission relied upon this memorandum in its determinations?
It's my impression now that the Commission did not rely on it at all, that the fact that the CIA was telling them that Nosenko was not a KGB officer and could not be relied upon dissipated anything that the memo says about him and what he claimed to know about Oswald, and caused the Commission to think that he was unbelievable about any of that.
Thank you. You want to recognize? Okay. Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Edgar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fithian will be back with some additional specific questions to you. Let me just ask you some general questions to help me focus on your role as with the Warren Commission and its relationship with the FBI. Did you personally meet with J. Edgar Hoover?
Yes.
What was his attitude towards you personally?
It had changed.
Changed from when to when?
From the way our relationship when I was with the Department of Justice. He was quite cold and non-communicative.
During your period of time on the Warren Commission?
No, you asked me about when I saw him, and I thought that's what you were dealing with. I went over to see him
no, if you
in his
just
office.
Clarify for me what you're talking about. His mood about you changed, and you said he was cold. Now, was that in your personal visits to him while you were with the Warren Commission?
Yes.
Okay. And
I don't think I had more than two if I had that many. I was dealing constantly with people below him.
And could you further describe what you mean by the coldness? What were some of the conversations that he would share that would indicate that coldness?
Well, by the nature of our work, when I was Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Office of Legal Counsel, I had many conferences with the President involving legal problems, and some of them necessarily involved the FBI, and so we had consultations about such matters. And the same is true when I was Solicitor General. And at all times, our relations were warm and cordial, and seemed to have an understanding between each other and cooperation, and trying to get the work accomplished that we had before us. When I saw him during my work with the Warren Commission in his office, he acted as though he felt that the Commission was hostile to him and to the FBI, and he commented upon all the man hours that we were demanding of him, and how it was a burden to the FBI, and it's carrying on its other work. And without actually abusing me, made it plain that he was not pleased with our relationships.
Did he resent the fact that you were double-checking the FBI's investigation?
Every agent that I had anything to do about when I did that resented it. But I just had to do it anyway, and I kept on doing it. And of course, that didn't help with any of them. They soon could find that out.
What is your feeling now in retrospect, looking back in terms of your relationship and the coldness and the resentment that the FBI felt about their alleged withholding from you of information?
Well, You know, I assumed at that time, apparently mistakenly, that they were professionals. And even though they didn't like whatever I would do as demand as a lawyer, or if I was too insistent about the investigation or wanted a better investigation or something more complete or more information or more disclosure, that they would recognize that I was acting as a lawyer and trying to carry out my work, and if they didn't like it, they still would appreciate that it was necessary to my work. And therefore, I never crossed my mind that they would deliberately withhold something as important as information about what had happened in connection with this assassination, which I thought was of major importance to the country. And I didn't think the FBI's interest in its own bureau, as important as it could, I appreciated it would be to an agent or to Mr. Hoover, still was more important than that of the country as a whole. And so I never thought that they would deliberately conceal or withhold anything. I thought there might be sometimes I'd have to pull it out of them. And I might have to keep after something a good many times that I should have been able to get the first time. But the other never crossed my mind, as I say, and I never believed that Mr. Hoover would deliberately lie to the commission.
One final question, just in terms of your own intuitive speculation relating to a question I asked former President Ford earlier this morning. Where do you think Oswald was going when he left the rooming house and walked behind the back alley there and up the street and shot Officer Tippett and went to the theater? Where was he heading? Was he just walking aimlessly, or did he have a direction that he was going?
Well, I have nothing except speculation. And I have always thought that he was just trying to get away. And that curious thing about life, that Officer Tippett would show up in that situation.
Did you have occasion to visit Jack Ruby's apartment?
No.
In Dallas? Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Time of the gentleman has expired. We have a time problem, I'm informed, with reference to the next witness to follow Mr. Rankin. Mr. Rankin, I wonder this. Several of the members have indicated they had some additional questions they'd like to ask you. I wonder if you would agree that if we submitted those to you, that you'd be able to answer them for the record for us. Would that pose any problem for you?
No, I'd be glad to do that.
Fine. All right. Then at this time, let me extend to you on behalf of the committee 5 minutes, which you're entitled to as a witness before this committee, at which time you may make any comment you'd like to make with reference to your testimony, and you may add to it or subtract from it or whatever you like. And I extend to you at this time that 5 minutes for that purpose.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to take up 5 minutes of this committee's time, but I do wish to express myself that I am maybe not happy to be here, but am quite willing to be here to assist in your deliberations in any way. And I hope that any enlightenment that you can contribute with your work and your staffs toward these problems will soon be available to the American people and will be helpful to their understanding of what happened. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rankin. We appreciate your cooperation and your presence and your testimony here. And again, thank you. Your excuse. Prior to recognizing counsel, I'd like the record to reflect the fact that I'm informed by counsel for the committee that prior to April 4th, 1964, that is February 1964 to April 4, 1964, that the FBI did have access to Nosenko, although Nosenko was under the control at that time of the CIA. After April 4th, 1964, they did not again have access to him until 1969.